Today's episode, I'm going to be speaking to Dr. Alexander Cummins. Hi, Al. How are you?
Hi, Vic. I'm grand, thank you. I'm really great. Really grateful for being asked to come on here and talk about creative process and all that sort of thing.
Well, pleasure's all mine, mate. I've listened to your voice quite a lot over the years, so it's good to actually see you and chat, face to face.
Thanks very much. My cats picked that exact moment to decide to attack each other vehemently.
Oh, that's okay.
It's very playful, bless them. But yeah, they picked that exact moment there. So I feel that's a good omen to start things on, right?
It is.
Set the cat amongst the pigeons.
I've placated my cat by feeding it before we started. So we have a cat thing in common here.
Yeah. Valuable.
So my traditional first question is, what do you do?
Oh, cheers. Well, I divine for clients and myself on occasion when I have a chance. I use that divination to help them strategize about decisions sometimes, as well as how to prepare for things now, bearing in mind what they would like to achieve, like what we can do at this point in order to maximize our opportunities, secure blessings, avoid maladies, pitfalls, and obstacles if we can, navigate those ones we can't avoid as best we can through them. And some of that involves bespoke spell work, we could say, spiritual work on their behalf, but I also make an awful lot of charms, talismanic objects, things of that nature. So I divine, I charm, and I conjure spirits to help do the divining and the charming side of things. I trained as a historian of magic, so I take a sort of have some strings to the bow in order to bring that to grimoire manuscripts and things like that. I'm very interested in early modern European spirit work, as exemplified through a variety of the grimoires and this kind of grab bag of the last 2,000-3,000 years of European spirit work that they kind of often reference, if not emerge out of from that context. So I'm a historian. I'm a consultant. I'm a teacher on occasion. I do classes online, and I also get invited on things like this to talk about magic and client work and divination and hopefully creativity as well.
Yes. Now, obviously, this is a side of things that I've not really. Well, there's a few people I've had on the show that have been in the same sort of wheelhouse as you, sort of thing. But it is something that's always fascinated me as from young days. So when did you sort of, what's your earliest recollections of things other? Let's put it that way.
That's a lovely way of putting it. Yeah. We went round. I'm like third, fourth generation pinko red diaper baby, as they say over here, like raised pretty devoutly socialist. But my folks would take us around a lot of old churches, old manor houses and things, partly so my dad could stand there and ask, how many workers do you think died building this? And so that sense of like the dead who did this has been present with me for a very long time. Yes. And the sense I had was usually of visiting places and having a sense of, I didn't learn the word palimpsest until much later, but the idea of layers of things on top, and obviously you can nerd out about Foucault and epistemes and whatever, but the idea that history is made of the wake of people and those layers, and feeling them less like I saw a grey lady walking down a flight of stairs, and more like walking into rooms and feeling feelings that aren't necessarily just yours.
Right. Right. That's great, because obviously living in the UK, there's just layer upon layer of stuff, isn't there?
Yeah. And the tradition of finding it and forgetting what it was, and kind of not reinventing it, but engaging with it again, like the monoliths, whether we're talking about Aubrey and Stonehenge and the Druids, or any number of other prehistoric or Paleolithic, sites which are, you know, inevitably some giant has thrown something somewhere, or that kind of thing. But there is almost a tradition of forgetting and remembering again and re-articulating our relationships with the landscape that really fascinates me, and engaging in that kind of tradition as itself like catching a wake that you are, you know, being dragged along behind kind of thing.
I think this is the interesting thing about, you know, about living in the UK. Everything's on top of everything else, and the history is underneath you and around you. And where I live is, as I said, it's quite near Brighton. I used to live near Lewes at one point, so that's all, you know, in that area. But of course, it's literally packed with pockets of things where you can point at and think, like little acupuncture points that are political, revolutionary happenings. You know, you can point at Lewes, and there's a Battle of Lewes, and you've got, you know, Thomas Paine, and, you know, you go up the road a bit and you've got the Boleyn's house, and you just can't escape it. It's just everywhere. And I think it sort of feeds, once you're then aware of it, like you're saying, you're not forgetting it anymore, and you start to see things like that. It does, from a creative point of view, give an interesting, well, you know, it could be political, as you say, like your father saying, how many people died with this, you know, building this, or, you know, where do we steal this stuff from that's all in the British Museum type of.
Right. Yes, ghosts are often coming with unfinished business, right?
Yes.
What are we haunted by? What would we like to wash our hands of or bury in the ground, and not have to deal with anymore? What skeletons have we built on?
Exactly. So you've got that, and you're saying about walking into a room and feeling something about it, not necessarily going, oh look, there's some, you know, something over there, but there's a physicality in that. And again, it wasn't until much later that I encountered
other ideas around a concept that Todd Ochoa, I think, talks about in Society of the Dead, which is a kind of auto-ethnography anthropology of Palo, of Afro-Cuban necromancy, or tradition, shall we say. Palo Mayombe specifically, I think. He coins the term ambient dead, this description of not just ghosts as discrete individual shades or stone tape recordings, but as a life force that the soul upon death kind of may dissipate into, or indeed be cohered out of. And this notion in Congolese ideas that we see in elsewhere in Afro-diasporic traditions as well, of this notion of an ocean of the dead.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah, I get that. I really get that. Yeah. No,
so this idea
I've not heard of that. You see, that's new.
Right. I mean, I'm still learning about this stuff as well, and my initiators in those traditions are often very, very clear about, like, you know, there's a difference between learning about something and going out and talking about it instantly. So, but these ideas about engagement with the memory of the world's soul, the world's spirit, where, you know, how the dead stick around in various ways that both are and aren't haunting.
Yes.
I've been very interested in this early modern kind of folk Catholic notion, like a folk eschatology, if you will, that while the soul may travel off, certain excellent souls might be tasked with sticking around.
Yes.
And they may well haunt the places that they haunt. They may well stick around in the places they worked well in life, in order to help those coming after them. So John Hayden talks about it. He quotes Cardan, I think, and he says they're like old men at the village greens watching the young men play bowls. They can't necessarily throw things anymore, but they can certainly come and, like, give you advice about how to stand and whatnot. And I've said that to some, like, necromancer colleagues, and they're like, that's a little patronizing. And I'm like, okay, I get that, but within a very Catholic cosmology of, like, no, you do not stick around unless God says so. And this occurring in a context, you know, post abolition of purgatory stuff. So this idea of the dead sticking around and having an interest, and maybe being able to be cohered from some of their habits, and that kind of thing, which again for me brings up, in terms of creativity especially, brings up the idea of, like, apprenticeship to dead poets or dead magicians in my case. And I think
magicians,
I think of, you know, obviously Ginsberg and Blake, and this idea of like an apprenticeship where you're kind of, if we were to take a very materialist attitude, you know, Ginsberg's like, I was kind of copying Blake, but also I was having these visions and he was coming to me and I was trying to occupy that voice so I could integrate it into my own work.
Yeah.
And again, we can get kind of like, it's going to depend on the specifics and the case by case basis and what you do with that like dead person's work and what's respectful versus like what's dressing up as them and those kinds of things. Not to mention, you know, should that person have living relatives, you know, maybe they have some ideas about how you may or may not, you know, work with their ancestors. Yeah. So it's a fascinating set of things in terms of like influence and where we are inspired, right? Inspire, to breathe in.
And of course, that word is interesting, isn't it? Inspired.
I hope so.
Yes, it is. When you're saying about that it's very sort of, there's a sort of a vibe of that, which is similar to like the Bodhisattva thing, you know, the person who's achieved enlightenment but doesn't leave and is there to assist others, you know.
Right, well, they have the three paths in Mahayana, the boatman, the journeyman, and the king, is it, that's sometimes translated? Yeah, the idea that like, you secure your own oxygen mask before helping others, but you don't just like secure your mask and then parachute out the plane, right? Maybe you need to stick around and help other people get their masks on after you've done yours. Yeah, that concept of excellent souls, which, you know, plays out historiographically in terms of like the difference between on the one hand, the sanctity of the saints and like, you know, angels who may have lived brief mortal lives as well, like all of the, you know, apocryphal stuff about Michael and things like that, to you know, to downright dirty necromancy and, you know, mucking about with murder victims and all sorts of unpleasant and you know, immoral things. And so for me, like this broad category of folk necromancy kind of covers a lot of interactions between the living and the dead, and especially the ones that like express or encourage some kind of experience or expression of that interaction, right? Not just like a ghost came, but also like what that prompted me to write or to paint.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what sort of point do you sort of take these things as part of how you see the world? That's a bit naff, but you know what I'm saying. I'm trying to get this idea of where you go, right, okay, this is a real thing. What I'm experiencing is a real thing. Or does that not happen? Does that's just the way you are and you get to a point where you just, what is it? Have you got a sort of an enlightenment moment? That's a bit of a crap word, but you know what I mean? That's sort of the thing where it's like, oh my God, you know, this thing.
Well, I mean, I think there's a little part when you're growing up in a quote disenchanted West, where when you do magic and it works, you know, there's a little part of you that's like, oh God, that.
Oh, okay. So is there anything you can share? Is there anything you can share, like an early one, where you sort of go like, oh my God, that was incredible?
Not so much in terms of like, I mean, the experience, the phenomenology of it, like what I felt was going on.
Yeah, something like that.
Certain rituals and things like that, for sure. Like that's kind of the point, right? Is you know, I'm very interested in again where like passions and expressed emotion and how that intersects with like pre-modern humoral theory and then, you know, elementism and magic and so on. No, honestly, the ones that have made me really pause and take my work on myself a bit more seriously were, I've been employed before now to, one of the early ones was a client reached out trying to get a diagnosis for their sister, like a medical diagnosis. Something was wrong. The test after test was doing very badly. And, you know, I didn't have the hubris to be like, I will cure this person. I was like, I know a spirit who can help. And so conjured them on a thunderstorm one night, and it was all very spooky, I assure you. And immediately the following day, they have a diagnosis that's easily curable, and within a month they are completely recovered from a chronic illness. And that stuff was less about, again, like the heavens opened and, a spirit cometh forth with 3 heads or anything like that, so much as it was like, I did something and there was a consequence to it that was positive. I should start taking this more seriously, because there is, I feel there's a certain ethics around, like, if you are able to do a thing, then maybe, and you can, and and it's helping people, then maybe you should work out how to do that well.
Yes.
So that was the real moment where it wasn't just about my own situation or things I wanted or needed. Although obviously securing one's own mask before helping others is crucial. But it was those kinds of moments of, realizing that that as far as I could tell through both like talking to spirits and using computational divination, I'm a huge proponent of geomancy, which seeks to be able to get some feedback and measurements on what's going on. I use it for discerning which dreams have come through the gate of horn and the gate of ivory, which ones are me processing the day and might be useful for me to reflect on, but aren't like a spiritual message necessarily, versus the ones that are. And so, I'm a big fan of the use of computational divinations like geomancy or even cartomancy to confirm the non-computational stuff, the spirit contact stuff, the communion stuff, the dreams, the visionary stuff.
Right.
And so hopefully they work in tandem to be able to to be able to debrief after you've done ritual, to be like, okay, how did that go? Like, did I like that for pre-flight check as well. A lot of airplane analogies today. The pre-flight check of like, is it, you've laid all your tools out, you've got your books and things, like, did I forget anything? Is this okay? Do I need to consider any other like consequences or things like that? So again, it's not just about like how it felt, it's also about when I took seriously the idea that I may be able to divine, to check that stuff was going on, and started getting good at, started putting the work in to get good at that. It's proved immensely rewarding for knowing what to do when I don't know what to do. And I think that's this kind of like core of vital wit that I've been thinking about of late in terms of magical creativity, of like knowing what to do when you don't know what to do, knowing how to find your balance again, knowing how to work out, how do I divine for clarity? How do I divine for health? So I know what to ask, right? So I know the right questions to ground, orient myself, and move forward, hopefully to, again, secure blessings and avoid unnecessary pitfalls.
You see, that's an interesting thing. One of the things I've sort of toyed around with quite a bit, or something that's really been something I've sort of not wrestled with, but an idea, is this thing about questions. It's not really, because it's about finding better questions. You know what I mean? It's not like necessarily getting the answer to the question, because as you go along, you realize actually the answer, that's too simplistic. It's, and then you find that the question that you're asking, and I find this a lot with like tarot reading, it's like there's another question upstream, which is the one that you should have asked. You know what I mean? And I find that that's quite fascinating, that and again, this is an important thing from like creativity, whether that's writing a song or whatever, is there's so much which is habitual. And to break that sort of the cliche, if or the way that you normally do things, I found using tarot cards is fantastic. Just a spread of tarot cards, and there's the narrative of the song in the cards, and it's not necessarily you're reading them,
sure, there's still an editor, right?
Exactly,
as Farrell said,
yes, but there's something coming in which is let's call it random for a moment. Inverted, but you understand that. So I think that's very interesting, you saying about that, and of course some people who are listening to this won't know what geomancy is, so you might need to just explain how the system works. Geomancy.
Sure, it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people.
Yes.
What I mean by it is an early modern, like Renaissance European divination system, like a travel size I Ching, So the hexagrams that people may be familiar with are the I Ching, the Book of Changes, are hexagrams because they're 6 lines that are broken or unbroken. So you have like a 6-bit binary figure or answer, and being 6, there are 64 of them. Of broken or unbroken combinations. Geomancy is a lot simpler. It's a travel edition. It's the bass guitar versus the regular 6-string.
So it's only got friends who are bass players.
Right. It's only got 4. I have a lot on
yes,
geomancy.
no, that's a guitarist joke. Yeah, I can do. Yeah, right.
In short, geomancy emerges from Ramel. Al Ramel, my Arabic accents are terrible. I apologize. The science of sand or sand cutting.
Yeah.
The geo of it refers both to the idea that you would make marks in the sand without counting them, like inflamed with prayer, as a later occultist will put it, and that you count them afterwards, and that's the random part that gives you the things that create your answer. Whether it's an odd or an even gives you a single dot or a double dot. You do that 4 times, and you have a figure. It's very astrological. It got very astrologized by the 11th, 12th century when it's kind of coming into Europe. And it's referred to as computational. It has very definite answers that are yes or no, are hard yes and no's depending on what the question is. So the figure of acquisitio, gain, 2 dots, 1 dot, 2 dots, 1 dot. You can do all these kind of cool gang signs with them. Acquisitio is gain. So if that's your final answer to a chart or a question about will I get a raise at work, it's likely the answer is yes. That's a pretty clear. If you're asking, will this new diet work? Will I be able to fit into my old trousers? Gain suggests probably not, right? So it's a very concrete system that spits out answers first. The judgment of a chart, a shield as it gets called, can be thought of like a 15-card spread that is gradually distilling down the facets of the situation to reveal a final judgment, a judge at the end, the 15th place, and then 2 witnesses that inform that judge, which form kind of like 3-card reading summary of the whole reading as well. So you get your final answer spat out at you straight away, and then you might look to the first 12 places, which are assigned to the houses of the heavens. Geomancy considers itself a sister of astrology, which is why it steals all our clothes. And so you can assign, you can look to your question about, your boss. You could also look to, say, the 10th, which is often the place, regnum, the house of superiors or authorities or lords over us. So we can look to this. We can look to what's going on. We can look to where it's gone and where it's headed, and we can also look to the specific facets of the tiny moving parts of the condition or the situation.
Cool.
So I love it. And again, having trained, my PhD was heavily on humoral theory and on the kind of interplay of psychology, psychiatry, magic, spirits, and medicine, and the heavy elemental nature of geomancy. It's geo also because it is a worldly oracle that deals with everything that happens on the earth, not just 1/4 of the elements. It's not just the earthy one, right? It's a worldly system, and it's very elemental. It's very humoral. It allows me to having a background of study in this stuff allows me to be able to pull out remediatory ritual gesture regimen of diet, of things like colors to wear, all these kinds of therapies and strategies of pre-modern medicine and magic start to become apparent in this system that is also very planetary. And so it's easy to talk to occultists about it because I can throw a chart for a client and be like, okay, so your Mars work right now, and they're like, yeah, I'm hitting the gym a lot, but so there's a common language, and we get to articulate particular bespoke solutions through that. Right. So yeah, I will evangelize about geomancy until you stop me. So I will stop myself.
Okay. So the question is, you said that you went and studied this for your PhD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So tell me about how you got to that decision, because this is an unusual point in time where you go, right, that's what I'm going to do. So,
yeah. Well, I went to, I did my undergrad and my master's at University of Leeds. I had a great time. Leeds was very, very good to me. I've still got a lot of friends up there. And I went to study. I did my undergrad thesis on the Ranters. I don't know if you're familiar with contemporaries of the Levelers and the Diggers. And I got very into this idea of mystical anarchism, basically, and this idea of what is the spiritual component of revolution? Like the way that the ranters would talk about being in singleness of heart. They were like very heterodox in terms of, they had quietists amongst them who were like, we all just need to, really contemplate suffering, to guys who would preach naked, like punks of their day kind of thing. They were likened to hippies at the time in the 70s when they were kind of rediscovered by historians. So we did it on that. That led me to think about, well, some of these guys were practicing magic as well. They're Giles Calvert, his R1 Flesh Press, which was putting out all this revolutionary material, was also putting out a bunch of magic. And I've been interested in magic since I was, 4. I'm a living chick tract come to life in many ways. Like, it doesn't make me cool to like proper serious occultists, but I played D&D with my dad from the age of about 4. I learned to write my name on character sheets. And so this idea of collaborative myth making and storytelling through like fantasy tropes and things like that, coupled with this idea of like, this is historically important, like these two streams kind of came together, and also practicing like Aikido and martial arts and having a sense of breath, and doing it in Birmingham next to an old auto worker plant with a bunch of like very burly, lovely working class auto workers who all were like very dedicated to wanting to become like Aikidoka Jedi, basically. Very serious about the manipulation of ki. And not in a like high ceremonialist, I understand the gnosis of nature, but in a like, I need to be able to settle violent things in pubs sometimes, So I was very interested in the history of this stuff, as well as the actual practice, and trying to explain these experiences I was having. And so I ended up doing my master's on the functions, the political, environmental, and social functions of astrology and astrological magic in the English Revolution and the 17th century. Eventually, I was lucky enough to have that published with Hadean Press as the Starry Rubric. That's what that book came from. Master's by research that got a little bit expanded. And then from there, I was looking at like, I was going over, Keith Thomas and the stuff around, again, abolition of purgatory and the rise of like cunning folk, and that was really becoming my focus as well. And realizing that, the political stuff was fascinating, the way, the royalists and the parliamentarians were both paying astrologers to tell the public that the stars say God is on our side and all that kind of thing, using a thief to catch a thief, all that kind of stuff. But really the stuff that interested me was the social, interpersonal, and deeply kind of sorcerous magical stuff. And so my PhD ended up being on magical approaches to the passions in 17th century England specifically, and early modern Europe more broadly. There's a lot of French mannerisms that comes in the 16th century and things like that. So there's interplay. We're talking to each other, And so I became more interested in how emotional experience and expression was mapped, managed, and manipulated through occult philosophy and magical practice. And so I kind of started from a like very political point, like back in the day, and kind of narrowed down to the sort of personal and interpersonal through that. I feel like it's maybe a very long-winded answer.
That's excellent, because there are so many things that you've covered there with regards to that. Because one of the things that sort of bugs me a lot about the way that history is taught just within schools is that, and this is the same with music, I must say, is that there is this thing that people just thought that, people now just think that people in the past were stupid. And it's
enormous condescension of history.
No, and it's sort of like, no. And because people thought in a particular way, they must be wrong type of idea. And I've even heard history teachers say things to pupils, and you think, that's absurd to think that. I mean, you could have a different, who's to say that we're right anyway? That's the point. That's the first thing, where we are with things in society. And obviously we've got lots of things wrong, because we wouldn't have the situations going on in the world that we've got. Yeah. But, I was thinking about the people like even people just in the New Model Army in the English Civil War. a bunch of soldiers who got together and sort of sat down and wrote out the is it the plum the not the Plumstead debates. What's the it's a series of things that they thought should be happening in a political process, and it is so modern. It's so incredibly modern. The idea that religion shouldn't be part of the ruling, the way that things are ruled. Politics is politics, and religion is something else. And these are sort of people that were supposedly just ordinary people. I think is it the Putney?
The Putney debates.
Putney debates, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, incredible, just ordinary people who you think, well, where do they get their ideas from?
Yeah. I think about that a lot. Yeah, that enormous condescension. The move to social history to not try and explain why our ancestors were daft, right? Or like what humans do when they don't have Twitter. Or something like to looking at their lived experience and what this articulated about their meaningful interactions in and as the world, and that they had opinions on things when they were asked. It's just no one asked them. The difficulty of literacy and records and who gets to tell the stories and all.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, who writes the story? Who writes the history? Now, I saw a video of you doing something on it was on YouTube, doing something about cut up.
Oh yeah,
which I thought was brilliant.
Thank you.
I've used cut up for years, but I was always intrigued by this sort of system of doing things just for writing songs. The obvious examples, but of course, the deeper you dig into this, you realise that this is being used by more than the obvious.
Right.
The most notable culprits, like Bowie, but so many people were using that technique, and the fact that Burroughs was friends with just about everybody who was anybody within the music business. Right. And again, that's another one of these weird connections, because I'm not very far away from East Grinstead, which Bowie lived in for a while, and of course he had a little bit of a run-in with the Scientologists, and they're literally up the road from so yeah, that's quite an interesting thing. So the thing that you did, because that involved you doing poetry in this video, so this is something that
it was a talk I was asked to do by Scarlet Imprint. I think we were talking about that before we started recording a little bit down in Brighton a couple of years ago. It was an event, and I'd done an article for their Mandragora poetry collection on Cut Up, which was imaginatively titled On Cut Up, and they asked me to turn that into come and do a talk of it of some kind. And it was in a bunch of different sections. There was stuff on like traditional scissor magic with shears, so like sieve shears, divination, putting scissors under your bed to ward off like bad dreams, not idly using scissors without actually cutting things. That's a big thing in Pakistan, apparently, amongst other places. So it's halfway. So some of it was like scissor folklore. Some of it was like the story of Cut Up. So Gysin in his particular hotel room first, invented it by mistake, trying to cut pictures with a newspaper backing, and realizing he's bladed out fragments of text, and then started working from there. And I randomized it with when I was growing up, we called them chatterboxes. Those like paper guys.
The things that you used to do. Yeah.
I've heard them called. I think in the States they get called cootie catchers. Who knew? I used one of those, and so I asked for a random number from the crowd, and randomized the talk for its different sections and different parts. Which just included a couple of like actual ones, like bits of my poetry as well, and it was nice to do a remix of an essay on Cut Up and turn it into a performance on Cut Up. And I'm still fascinated by the process of doctoring things, shall we say, like of cutting them up and articulating new things. There's a notion that creativity itself might be thought of as the rearticulation of what we don't yet
Yes.
know by mixing up what we do know.
Exactly. Right? See, this is the interesting, because I teach this system. After, you know, there's a summer school that I run every year. Used to be every year. But anyway, we got this coming up shortly. But we do a thing about songwriting, and often it's people that have never written a song before. They play a bit of guitar or they play drums or whatever, and we get them into a room, and using kata, we create lyrics. And of course, the first thing that happens is they sort of go like we've burst their bubble. You know, they realise that this song that they've loved, it's like, oh my God, you mean to say that they did that? And it's like, quite likely, you know, because even
Lemons on sale again.
Yeah.
Right.
If you just look at the lyrics here, you know, like a Nirvana song, you know, and you can see the structure. It's not like somebody sat and crafted the poem, if you see what I mean. Anyway,
yeah.
But once that starts to happen, and you know, and some people sort of think like, you know, it's ruined stuff for them. I said, well, hang on a minute. So what happens when you come up with an idea? What is that? You know, what is that stuff? Well, it's obviously stuff that's already in your head. But when it's really good, it's like it comes at you in a way that you didn't expect. So it's not cliched.
No.
But it's not something that you've never experienced. You know, it's like I say to somebody, you know, if you've written a song and it sounds like suddenly some musical scale that you've never heard before from Anatolia or something like that, you can go, right, okay, that's possibly truly original, but it never happens.
Right.
It's always
a
formulation of something. Now, but what I'm fascinated by is then by pushing that idea out, and I do this with people where they'll use obviously bibliomancy. Really, that's what most of the cut is.
Yeah.
And I've had some very strange experiences with that, doing things like this.
And it starts to talk about itself.
Well, one particular thing, I was in a little sort of hippie festival that there are quite a lot of them down here, and I turned up at lunchtime to do this thing, and did this. You know, we created this song, and you know, got these magazines, you know, National Geographic and you know, color supplements and things, and just sort of got people to pull out a phrase.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then we started writing this, and then somebody went, this is very strange, because this song is about something that we were listening to this morning at another talk. And it was like, they were all like completely, and you go like, well, let me tell you about
and it's easy. It's easy not to think. I think it's easy not to think about who you are talking to when the message is good. Like when you're divining, when you're like, when the song just flows, when the words come from somewhere else. It's easy to be like, to concentrate on the product of that, of what was channeled, what like you were moved to do, rather than like who is saying it. It's when, for me, it's when cut up starts to talk about itself, when your cut ups start to talk about the fragments talking back. Aware of themselves. And also when it starts to talk about what's happened like before that day, like the morning or what happens tomorrow. You know, we're into Burroughs' thing about this is Harrispexy, right? When you cut into the present, the future bleeds out.
Exactly. And of course, the other thing, of course, we're talking about Burroughs, because I didn't mention Guyson, obviously, because he's a very important, well, more important in many respects, but is the fact that Burroughs was doing things with tape recordings. And of course, in a way, I mean, he's the godfather of sampling.
Yeah.
And,
I've been getting very into tape sampling of late again. The idea of making something physical, the idea of taking an impression from a place and having a physical image of it. So a tape that you can run energy through, not just in an abstract or a new thought or running energy in inverted commas through, but like tape artists will recommend people put their cassettes in a hot boot of a car for a summer so that they get that warble quality to them. It is understood that they are being exposed to things that change the timbre, flange quality of this physical impression of the ambience of a place, right? And so it's not that it's not this, I've been thinking about it a lot. It's not the same as going and getting a stone from a crossroads and being able to work that crossroads from that stone. It's not quite the same as that, but it is like going and taking an etching from a grave, I think, right?
Yes.
And with that image of the thing, you are able to conjure from there. Like the getting dirts from a location isn't the same as having the thing, but it is access to that thing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so that idea of a physical imprint, like the notion of going between digital and tape is also really interesting to me for like the deliberate, artifacts and originally like mistakes, the gated reverb, the accidental genesis of that, like Genesis in the studio, and the intercom isn't turned off, but it has a noise gate on it, so that like awesome 80s like hand claps like snare, the gated reverb that everyone ends up loving. Total mistake. But people love it.
There are so many of those, aren't there? Let's face it, how those things worked. I mean, obviously, a lot of the Sgt. Pepper album, for instance, is a good example, because the Sgt. Pepper album itself is cut up. I mean, it's got the montage on the front with all the people. Right. But, of course, you've got all these songs that, to be quite honest, they don't go with one another. But they've got a few songs about a circus and things, but they appear to. Just like when you put all these random things together, it magically makes sense. Right. There's a narrative in this thing. And I think the classic thing about that, talking about cut up, talking about itself, the whole process, is the song A Day in the Life is itself more than one song. You've got Lennon's bit, you've got McCartney's bit, and you've got the orchestral bit in there, and then sort of you get this, and then you got McCartney, and then you got and it goes back and all this sort of thing. And of course Lennon actually tells you how he wrote the song at the beginning. I read the news today, oh boy, and it's all the things in the newspaper and something in a film,
right? So that's the way that Cut Up feels like it's putting on main and like front and center from Jump Street onwards, that you are being influenced by things. You are not some like, demiurge creating your own language and that sense of like all ultimate reality when you like declare something. You are remixing from all of these influences from your whole life to this point. And so originality might well exist small o, I think, in terms of like the particular instantiations of like a lifetime of experience, contemplating something or not, or just idly coming to it, whatever it is. There is a uniqueness there, but the strive for capital O originality is a huge creative block, right? Keith Johnston in Impro, right?
Yes.
Originality is a huge block. Like really trying to be original, you'll wind yourself in knots. Following the idea, this notion of like, he's, the other one that he says is like self-expression. You're expressing, you're not just expressing yourself necessarily. And to think of it only as self-expression rather than like, I was going with the flow, I was feeling. So he uses the example of Inuit or Eskimo wood carvers, right? Or bone carvers, and says like, they don't, when John 3 Igloos Down is making, some disturbing art. They aren't like John, probably needs to talk to the equivalent of a therapist. They're like, spirits in seal bones are weird these days, right?
Yeah.
And this notion that you are the hollow bone, right? That you are a conduit for something when you're creating. Again, we don't necessarily have to get paranoid about like who is giving us these ideas. We don't have to go full Descartes, demon/brain in a jar or anything. Or any of that, cosmic paranoia, Gnostic paranoia. But the idea of aligning with something and contemplating those mysteries and trying to instantiate them in exploratory ways, experimental ways. An experiment being something that you don't know what the end result will be, right? This is the old word for spell as well, experimenta, right?
Right.
You would gather the things, and this is like Frank Clarson's take on why early modern conjuration has one foot, he says, in the emergent scientific epistemology. You are setting up your lab, you are doing an experiment to get information back, and then you are assessing that information. Now, just because your lab is a magic circle, just because your experiment is summoning a demon, and just because your information is what the demon tells you from the scrying mirror about the nature of like mankind or the eschatology of the cosmos or any of those other things that conjurers love asking, as well as, knowledge of the liberal arts, cheating on your exams, they're still doing experimental methodology. They're still doing inductive logic. They're still doing these kinds of reasonings. And he says, so they have this one foot in the emergent scientific methodologies, and they have one foot in the old dirty medieval magics.
Yeah.
And that, again, that crossroads of the early modern period really fascinates me for where people are understanding that knowledge and articulation of things might not just be a sole endeavor of them going and having an experience. It might involve something else talking to you.
Yes.
And articulating that idea together as well.
Okay, so this is great. This is a really great point, because one of the things that I say to people is the song is a thing itself. It's got its own spirit, and it lives. And when you're conjuring it, you're bringing it in. The Keith Richards got this great thing that all the songs are out there. You take your guitar and you hook them in, right?
Right. It's a very spirit model, right? I'm not inventing a spirit. I'm not like birthing an egregore. No, they're already there. I'm just inviting them to tea. Yeah,
exactly. And the thing is that once that happens with a song, it's like like you're saying with the creative process, with it, poetry or whatever. There gets a point where it suddenly is its own thing. It starts to finish itself off. You may have to sort of court it somehow,
right.
Bring it flowers or whatever it is that you're doing to sort of, encourage it to be interested in you. And then you get to a point where suddenly you just know what's needed. It starts to talk to you.
Right.
And that's the type of thing that obviously adults have a lot of problem with this, because they're kids find this easy because you're playing a game, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at the sort of the way that songs can sort of happen like that, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're a little bit more tricksy. They don't want to give up all their secrets to you straight away. But the point about it is that you're not trying to work it out.
Right.
You're trying to invite it in, which is it's like you're saying, with the Eskimo carver, it's the spirit of the bone doing the thing, as well as you doing the thing that you act as a conduit to it.
Sure, yeah. My dear friend Jesse he loves quoting, I think it's Picasso, inspiration will find you, but it has to find you working.
Yeah, yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that idea of also like this the notion of like motivation and sleight of mind, the idea that like that we keep having studies that show that the emotional versus the rational parts of when we make decisions and when we decide to do things, very often we frame creativity as, I need to have the motivation to do this thing, as opposed to setting motivation up for success, right?
Yeah.
Being receptive, being there, inspiration finding you working. Like, great, come on in. And I like the notion of sleight of mind, because I definitely have that thing of like, I am daunted by this project of some kind, so I'm not going to do it now, but I am just going to put the books here, and I'm just going to like have the pull quotes here, and I'll have my notes here, and I'll just copy them up, and I'll maybe like edit that typo, and I'll rearrange that sentence, and I'll start that paragraph, and then you're in it.
Yeah.
Like totally. That, I have to talk myself into that sometimes.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. There is a sort of an NLP thing like similar to that,
Right.
I think it's called sleight of mouth or something, but it's a very similar sort of idea.
Yeah.
But it is that sort of thing of putting yourself in the space that allows it to take shape without the editor coming in.
Yeah.
Because
otherwise you trying to, for me, it's always about like, I think about Scrabble. I can't build Scrabble. I can't build the words off the tiles without physically moving them.
Yes.
Like it doesn't, use my brain in the same way.
No.
I have to physically move them. I need to be in that space. I need to be twiddling knobs. I need to be doing things.
Yes.
Yeah. I need to be writing on paper a lot of the time as well.
Yeah. Yes. I find the same thing. I find it really difficult actually just typing. I have to write or speak and record something. You know, even if by the time you realise the dictation software has come out with something completely different. But I mean,
I was re-listening to. I really love Douglas Adams. I was re-listening to him reading the first Dirk Gently book, Holistic Detective Agency, and one of the characters. It's incidental to the plot. I'm not going to drop spoilers, but one of the characters rings his secretary's answer phone to ramble messages to himself because he doesn't want to. And they're like, oh, doesn't he want you to pick up the phone? Like, no. He doesn't want to talk to me. He wants to talk at me. Like, well, why doesn't he just buy a dictaphone and record himself? Because he doesn't want to feel crazy for talking to himself.
Yeah.
Right? It's like all of these sleights of mind we employ.
Yes.
And that ends up being a big plot point that they need to get the answer phone message and things like that. But the idea of like the different ways we record ourselves in the different contexts we do it. Letters to people that might not read them, I think of as well, things like that. Again, ways in which formulating a communication can be a way of like realizing what we're trying to communicate.
Yeah. You're talking about this. There's a lot of ritual behavior that goes on with people that you wouldn't necessarily go like, you know, let's call them the normal people would sort of go, that's ritual. But I used to know somebody who was the wardrobe mistress for Greenwich Theatre. And she'd tell you the stories about the little rituals that the actors and actresses did. You know, somebody would have lucky socks or whatever, you know, somebody had to turn around 3 times or whatever, and all that type of thing. And of course, you know, you look at that and you think, well, again, it's a sort of sleight of mind. Hang on.
Acting is a whole other ballpark in terms of like, when are you not yourself? Like in terms of like channeling, whatever we want, you know, articulating something that isn't entirely just from you. The actors who are also magicians and witches that I know, like have such fascinating conversations about about that kind of articulation. And again, trying to work out how much I can say about that.
Just whatever.
I was told by someone that apparently the Globe used to have things, and that there was a clear out, and people aren't terribly happy about it. And there's a lot of politics, so I don't know how much I can say, but some of those bundles seem to have been from costumes of characters that had been going since the Globe had. And the idea that was kind of floated to me was that, you know, if you're an actor, you were playing like a big part you would maybe go and add to that bundle. Go and ask permission from all your predecessors who had played that part that now you played, right? That there's a simpatico there already. You are literally ritually doing the gestures, saying the things they said, right? In that space. That's fascinating to me.
Oh yeah. And to me. Amazing. Yeah. Okay, so we've got to get back to some of the other stuff you do. So we've got you're still in our sort of storyline. You're still in the UK, but you're not, of course. So after you finished your masters, what happens? What do you do?
Oh, I was finishing up
you qualified.
I was finishing up my PhD, and I met a lovely girl and decided to move to the States. Which is a great reason to do anything. And so I moved to New York, you know, the crossroads of the world, as it calls itself.
Well, that's a suitable name, isn't it?
It was very apt. It's very apt. And again, New York and Brooklyn especially has been very good to me. Very, very good to me indeed. Yeah. Good.
So you've made a lot of contacts out there, because obviously you've got a lot of things that you do out there.
Well, I've got a background in the festival circuit. I was emceeing a cabaret and going around with a big top with a bunch of friends from Leeds, the Ladybird Collective, and so we would go around festivals and put on workshops in the day, doing like, puppet building and things like that.
All right.
For kids and big kids. And then we would do cabarets in the evening. So I have a background in emceeing and performance poetry and comparing and things like that. And so I love touring. And so when I got over here at the States, I would go out to places and meet people at their local witch shops and stuff. And I, there's a little kibosh on that with some unpleasantness over 2020 that you may have heard about. But but hopefully, as that becomes safer to travel, I'm looking forward to getting back on the road and meeting people. So yeah, getting to make contacts and getting to not just stand at those crossroads, but make decisions at them and go down them and see how they don't just open things for me, but are able to interconnect with other people and communities and things like that. I've been very fortunate to meet some really lovely people who've been very generous and invited me into their communities in a variety of contexts. Yeah.
So you've got a number of books out. Are you working on anything at the moment?
Oh, yeah, constantly.
I'm
a little butterfly-minded, so I try and, again, I don't know if it's a hot creative tip or evidence of my own pathology, but using your own procrastination to your advantage, doing the thing you don't want to do least next. And so I work on a thing until I'm like kind of like sick of it for a hot minute, and then we'll obsess over something else for 5 minutes and then keep doing that. And so if I can keep those, again, as a self-employed consultant sorcerer, if I can keep all those plates spinning, then it all works and they inform each other. And
that's amazing, because that's exactly like what I do. I have a low attention threshold, so I have like several things on the go, and I will do exactly that. I will do a bit of, this book that I'm working on, and I've got this stuff I've got to do for such and such, and then I'll go and, I don't know, play a game of chess and then come back and do something. And for some people, it's like, don't know, you can do that.
Keeps things flowing and fresh. Other people, yeah, exactly, are like very, it's a tortoise and hare thing.
I must tell you a little story, which is, I interviewed youth from Killing Joke. And I had a bit of a problem trying to nail him down to time, and I would get a time sorted out, and then he wouldn't be around. It was like, it was a bit frustrating. But anyway, what happened was, when I finally managed to get to interview him, I said, so, we were talking about working, and he said, well, he said, what I like to do is I'll have some, like, chat radio 4 or something on in the background, and a music program on in one room, and there might be another one on in another room while I'm working on, because he's a record producer as well, right? On the thing that I'm doing, and I may have a sketch on the go. And I was thinking, okay, that takes that to another level.
Literally doing several things at once.
Wow. Spinning. I was like, okay, I get you. So I suddenly thought, now I know why he didn't pick up my. This is my message. I'm trying to get in contact with you, because that was just mind blowing.
Yeah, yes, gosh, yeah. I mean, the efficiency of that astounds me. Like, I'm like, oh, maybe I should think about that then.
Oh yeah.
I have a friend who's an energy worker who's been doing a bunch of stuff around sleep yoga and like ways you can do stuff while you're asleep. So like, working on your energy body and stuff like that. Again, just like the sheer efficiency of it. I'm very lucky in terms of like writing and research projects and experimentation and trying to test drive a bunch of this spirit work. To also to be not just writing my own stuff, but I'm an editor for Revelor Press's Folk Necromancy and Transmission series, and so I get to edit works from, or help do some editing and chase down typos and things like that in anything from like the Spark Conspocker they put out on the Black Books, Scandinavian Black Books traditions, to a translation of an Arabic grimoire that I'm working with a translator and an artist on at the moment. Should have more forthcoming on that soon. So when your own writing starts to frustrate you and tear my hair out, like being inarticulate, then I can move some of those skills to help other people express themselves.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm really proud of the work we do on folk necromancy, and also how, you know, Janet Revelor supports her authors and things like that. I don't think she would mind me mentioning that about an author who is currently doing a work on Leonora Carrington, and is involved. Like, she was like, I have to move to Mexico City for a couple months to go and like conjure her spirit. And Jen was like, okay, here's a grant for that. You know, like, it's great to work for. It's great to work as part of a publishers that like supports artists in their more ritually kind of like parts of their process. You know, I put my Book of the Magi out through Revelor, and that included going on pilgrimage to Colin Dom and like seeing their crowned skulls in the golden ark and things like that.
Wow, fantastic. Well, Al, that's cracking. That was such a brilliant chat.
Oh, bless you. Thanks so much for having me.
Really
it's
cool.
It's lovely to get to
it's really
talk
great.
about this stuff. And seriously, like this is a ping for me in terms of like, I've been very like getting more interested in tapes, and also in building a pedal board recently, and thinking about planetary, combining Ficinian humoral planetary music theory with loops and drones, and recording back and forth from tape. Can the tape take the charge of like a conjuration of the spirit of a planet, and can it be dubbed over and over, and can that loop itself, especially if you're using not just tapes with spools of like 90 minutes and then it stops, but like answer phone endless tapes, that's the circle right there. So this has been great for me in terms of like I'm feeling kind of a lot more inspired about my.
Which is good, because I mean, I think this is I've got a friend who's a herbalist who's actually just publishing a book on humoral.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, and because I only live, again, not far from where Culpeper grew up,
right?
London. So yeah,
that's remarkable. That's great.
Yeah, but I think that's an interesting thing. Again, it's the idea of the humours in the way that, you know, I think there's being able to return to that type of thinking for certain things, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I maintain there are some babies that we can rescue from that bad medicine backwater.
Yeah.
The easiest way of, you know, humoral theory isn't just rubbish medicine, you know. It's also not just, and in more recent years, the idea of it being like a BuzzFeed test of like a personality typology, you know. You're a choleric, you're the equivalent of, you know, oh, you're such a Samantha, right? And it is, but the thing is, that personality test, that sense of the charge of like elementated virtue, doesn't just exist in people. It exists in circumstances, in places, in types of gesture and action and reaction and speech and song and words and music and images. Like, we are, again, thinking about how we exist in an ocean of influence, right? Action at distance, knowledge at distance, contagion, all those concepts start to make a lot more sense when we realize like we are, you know, we're in the thick of it already. And again, working out how can we be emotionally and spiritually intelligent and responsible in how we are influenced and influenced.
Yeah.
Right.
Brilliant stuff.
There's a lot. Yeah. There's a lot of responsibility that we get to step into if we're paying attention to this stuff, and hopefully magic and other creative endeavors get to be a way that people step more into their own sense of themselves and their own sense of responsibilities in the world, and working towards, you know, trying to leave it in a better place than we found it.
Yes.
Hopefully, if that's not too much of a naive idealism to end on.
Well, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with Satish Kumar, but I mean, Satish's thing is that, because, you know, he's a peace activist and incredible man, and he was sort of saying that when people say to him, well, you're a bit of an optimist, aren't you, type of thing, you know, whatever, and he said, well, where have the realists got us, type of thing.
I love that.
Yeah. So I think that's the thing to sort of look at, you know, when people sort of think we might be coming from a rather strange place. You think, yeah, but come on, where are we at the moment? You can't
Right.
get any stranger with what we've ended up with.
Yeah, I think there's room for some strange ideas right now,
Exactly.
especially some strange ways that we can feel closer to each other, more intimate and more responsible.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, so I'll put some stuff in the show notes about people can contact you.
Cheers. Yeah, I can send you all sorts of details around.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Website and links to things like that.
Yeah. And anything, any directions that you want to point people into, like, things that you obviously you've got all your books and stuff like that. But if you've got anything coming up, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah. We're on a little break from Radio Free Golgotha at the moment. The podcast I do with Jesse, because he's up at big school doing his masters in performance studies. So I get to hear about all this take on acting and possession, and stuff, which is what he's doing his masters on. Which is great. Have your friend read the cool books that you don't have time for.
Yeah.
Very fortunate. But I can post to. I can send you some links to those.
That'd be great. That'd be absolutely.
It's been a great chat, Vic. Thank you so much for having me on.
I've been looking forward.
It's also just great to get to know you a little better. Oh, bless you. Cheers, mate.
Excellent.
Nice one.
Speak to you soon, then.
All right. You take care. Be well.
Bye. Massive thanks to Alexander Cummins, Dr. Al, to his mates, I think. That was really interesting. The guy's written some astonishing books. So check all the stuff out in the show notes. Until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.